Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon. I don't know which other way to start this, so let me quickly get this BioTalk on the road. Uh, we'll be starting a kind of a one-on-one section, kind of from a BioTalk, so that people will be able to get some informations that are necessary in order to fulfill one of the mission and vision of the microbiotist BioTalk that is set up. So today we'll be talking about introduction to viruses. I have to do this because I don't want to start from the top. I want to start from where you can easily get basic information. Then from there we'll advance. We'll talk about the diseases that viruses cause, then and other things as well. Anyway, so let's just go. My name is Fasuan, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Of course, I'm a virologist, molecular scientist, a science communicator, I'm the CEO of Microbiotics and the convener of this particular BioTalk. It's an idea from the multimedia section of the company, of the firm, and I hope that those of you in the group will eventually get to hear more about whatever it is we're about in this group. So let's start with viruses. What are viruses? Of course, most of us are very familiar with what viruses cause, and over the years we've had tons and tons of diseases that viruses cause, and I always tell people that viruses are more or less on top of the food chain. They are in terms of survivability. They are the organisms, even though they are not really organisms per se, but they are the organisms that can infect other organisms and they themselves cannot be infected. They are the top of the disease chain, and that makes them a little bit complicated for us to deal with. Over the years, they've caused a lot of damages in terms of health. They killed millions. The influenza virus, Spanish flu of the 1900s, they caused a lot of damages, killing a reported 200 million people and the likes. We've dealt with smallpox, we've dealt with HIV, we've dealt with Ebola, we've dealt with swine flu, SARS, and presently we are dealing with COVID-19. These are viral diseases of epidemic scale, of pandemic scale that goes worldwide. We haven't mentioned those ones that are more or less relegated to regions. We haven't mentioned those ones that are particular to some part of space, like West Nile virus, which is very common in the United States. Japanese encephalitis, which is also common in Asia and some part of the Middle East. And of course, definitely in Africa, we have some other viruses like chikungunya. We have some like yellow fever that are domiciled here. So along the lines, we'll be talking about this. But like I tell people, viruses and the diseases they cause are here to stay. It's only left to us humans to continue coming up with ways to deal with them. So hopefully we'll get lucky, we'll get some breaks once in a while, but we just need to be on our toes every time so that we'll be able to overcome whatever it is they throw at us. So what are viruses? Let's quickly break down what makes these agents, what makes them unique, what makes them a little bit different from other disease-causing agents. So viruses are submicroscopic, intracellular, and obligate parasites which contain either RNA or DNA genome surrounded by protective virus encoded protein codes, and depending on specialized host cell for propagation. This definition, of course, is not really a no definition. It's a definition that kind of summarizes what viruses are. So I'll be taking each one of these unique words, the unique terms that I underlined, and I'll be breaking them down so that you get an idea of what viruses are. So let's start with submicroscopic. Definition, of course, means that when something is submicroscopic, it's too small to be seen by an ordinary light microscope. And when you consider this, you know that in the majority of the laboratories around us, what we have commonly is what they call it light microscope with different level of magnification. But viruses can only be seen by electron microscope, and that's even if they are stained, and we are talking of magnification that are of extremely high level. So if you look at the image I gave here, I'm talking about microscopic, submicroscopic, microscopic, and submicroscopic. If you look at that submicroscopic, you are saying nothing. You are saying nothing. You can't really see them. That's why it's just there. So all other forms of disease-causing agents are microscopic in nature. Even some, especially some protozoa and algae, we can call them submacroscopic. Some can be seen even with the naked eyes if your eyesight is very, very good. So, but viruses are completely submicroscopic. You can't see them even with your regular microscope. That makes them actually difficult to be what you don't see. You may not really be able to envisage how it will attack you. So that's one of the advantages they have to their own personal self, not to us, so that we don't get it twisted. So the other definition is intracellular. Now, something that is existing or functioning within the cell is what we call intracellular. The viruses don't operate outside the cell. In simple definition, we've heard about a cell being the smallest unit of life, and they make up the tissue. From tissue, we go to organ. From organ, we go to system. Yes, O-level biology. So now we are talking of something that is so small that can penetrate the cell. All other disease-causing agents are extracellular in nature. If you look at the image that I gave, the image inside this slide, you can see what intracellular and extracellular space mean. They are outside the cell. These other organisms, these other disease-causing agents are big. They only infect the extracellular spaces. They have the means, they have the mechanism, the know-how to survive outside the host cell. That's where they exert their ability. For instance, a bacterium can decide to produce toxin around the extracellular spaces and exert whatever it needs to do. It can infect all those spaces. It doesn't need to penetrate inside the cell to actually cause any damage or to propagate. But viruses, they need to get inside the cell before they can cause any damage. They need to get inside the cell. Apart from the fact that that's the only way they can survive, it's also a way in which they can also cause their infection. That's the only way they can cause any disease inside the body. They need to infect the cells, and from that they will be able to propagate themselves. They get familiar with the cell mechanisms, and then they do their stuffs. So that's another issue that makes viruses, makes them unique. They need to get inside the cell. As small as the cell is, they get inside to do their specific bad work, in quotes. So let's move on to the next one. Yeah, obligate. Yeah. Now, we call this obligate parasite, but we have to break down the obligate. I use some funny examples there, so don't mind me, but you cope with that. Um, Obligate is something that you can't do without. Like, uh, what we're saying here is that viruses cannot exist in a particular way apart from being a parasite. You've always said that when a virus is outside the body or outside the cell, they are inactive. They don't. They are more or less like a non-living entity. They don't have any form of life, any form of what they call this in secondary school, Mr. Niger D or whatever it is we call it back then. So they don't exhibit any form of living when they are outside the cell. The only time they get excited, they get activated is when they are inside a living host, inside a living host cell. And that's why we call them obligate. The opposite of that is facultative, when you can exist in another form. But viruses can only exist as a parasite. They can only exist inside the cell. And I gave one example here. Is like what you people always say, Yoruba people and pepper. Yoruba people cannot exist without pepper. They love peppery food. The same way viruses. If you can give other examples, don't quote me on that. Don't let people come for me. So, but that should break it down for you that viruses cannot exist in any other way of life apart from being parasitic. So, and don't let me say the last one, parasites. All viruses are parasites. I think we should just have it at the back of our mind. All viruses are parasites. And if you look at the definition of a parasite that I gave here, an organism that is living in, on, or with another organism in order to obtain nutrients, growth, or multiply, often in a state that is directly or indirectly harmful to the host. Now, when it comes to viruses, they are parasitic in nature, and like I've told several people, the only reason why a virus will infect anybody is because they want to multiply. That's the only function they have. They've evolved to a stage in which all they want to do is just to multiply. They want to survive. They want to survive. They don't eat. They don't obtain nutrients. They don't grow, except if we want to count multiplication as growth. They don't respire. They don't have any other or any of those Mr. Niger property. They don't exhibit any of those ones except to multiply. Their genetic makeup has been conditioned to only multiply. So, and in that way, that's the only reason why they are harmful to the human. If they have other ways, they will do that. That's well, that makes me a little bit sympathetic to them, though I know most people don't want to hear that. Of course, I understand the need for them to survive. They've been trying to explore. For my own findings, I think they've been trying to explore several ways of surviving over the years, millions of years ago, and they just arrived at the fact that the only way they can do that is just to keep multiplying. It's not as if they want any other thing apart from, they just want to multiply. They don't want to eat, they don't want to grow, they don't want to respire, they don't want to defecate, they don't want to do anything. All they just want to do is just get inside the cell and produce more of themselves. They make more copies of themselves. And that's just, and in that way, they get to harm the hosts. They get to become parasitic. They are living in us, they are multiplying, and then they are causing a lot of damages. Also, I will ask you to not quote me on what I wrote there as an example, where I asked that what are those things that are being parasitic to us right now. I wanted to mention UAR, but don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. I didn't say that. Okay. Okay. So, okay. This is also one of the properties that makes them unique. The viruses have either RNA or DNA, and some of them can even alternate between the two. most living organisms have DNA as their nucleic acid. They don't have, in fact, only viruses have RNA as their nucleic acid, as their default nucleic acid. And if you look at this may look a little bit confusing, but it's actually the groups. They are actually the groups of the classification, the group of viruses that we have based on this property. Eventually, maybe for advanced talk, we'll be talking about why all these groups are very, very important. But if you look at the group from group 1 to group 7, we listed the different classification and the viruses that are present under each classification. Look at group 1, we have adenoviruses. Group 2, we have parvoviruses. Group 3, we have rota. Group 4, we have corona. Oh yes, that's the coronavirus are under group 4. And you can see that they are single-stranded RNA viruses. Group 5, we have Ebola, Lassa. Oh, of course, we are also familiar with this one. Group C's, we are familiar with this, HIV. Oh, yes. And these group C's are also very unique. They are the one that can alternate between RNA and DNA form of nucleic acid. Then we have the group 7, we are also very familiar with. That's the hepatitis virus, hepatitis B precisely. Not all hepatic viruses have this are in this group. The only one that is there is the hepatitis B virus. So this is more or less like their classification and one of the things that makes viruses unique. And I think lastly, we have to talk about specialized host cells. Viruses don't just attack every part of the body except some few ones. They have specific cells that they target. They have specific cells that they target. They have a form of tropism. And this is largely dependent on what we call cellular receptors. Cellular receptors are usually present on every cells in our body, and these cellular receptors have affinities for what we call ligand on viruses. It's like the lock and key concept. Those two will fit in together, and eventually they'll find a way to get inside the cell. From my own research, it took years, thousands of years, for maybe not thousands of years anyway, because if there's a theory concerning SIV and the ability to mutate into HIV, and the recent supposed genetic modification that was done to corona, maybe it won't take years anymore before a particular virus develop a particular ligand for some particular receptors. So what's happening here is that on the surface of every cell we have what we call cellular receptors, and then on the surface of most viruses we have what we call ligands. So once they are able to fit into each other, the virus will gain entry into the cell. It's as simple as that. It's like when you use the right key to open the correct door, and then the door will open for you. And so because of that, we have some viruses that are very specific about the cells that they infect based on the ligand cell receptor properties. So you just hear some viruses are respiratory viruses. Why? Because they infect cells around the respiratory system. You have some viruses that are more or less like what they call a gastroenteric viruses. They have affinity for the cells on the GIT, the gut, the stomach, the intestine, and the likes. We have some that are what we call hepatic viruses. Those ones that infect the liver. these ones have affinity for the cells on the liver. So when they get there, they are able to infect the liver. So this specialized target makes viruses extremely, to some extent, predictable, and even it gives a form of genetic resistance to some diseases caused by viruses. Yeah. I'll give two examples. I've often stated is that not everybody can be infected by HIV virus, because the particular receptor that is needed for HIV virus to actually infect a cell. Don't forget that viruses infect inside the cell. So the particular receptor needed for HIV to get inside the cell are lacking in some set of people. I'm not going to give you all those information, but that's the fact. Some people don't have this receptor. So no matter how many times they are exposed to HIV virus, they don't get infected. So they are resistant in some way. If you remember at the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic, there's an article I wrote after making some findings that one of the reasons why we Africans are resistant, even at the initial stage and even up till now, to this SARS-CoV-2 is because we don't have the receptor necessary for the virus to penetrate our cell like some other races. For example, we don't have it like they do in Europe. Some countries in Europe, we don't have it like they do in some countries in the USA. We are kind of we are insulated from all this, and in some ways we don't get to be infected. But we now have some viruses that can infect a lot of cells in the body. They have multiple ligands for multiple cell receptor, and that's where we have the hemorrhagic viruses like the Ebola and the Lassa. So that's the introductory parts of this talk. I hope we've been able to get some stuff, some information. Later we'll talk more about other things, and I hope I'm able to do some good job about this. So see you next time. We'll give much more information, and hope you are able to hope you are able to stay with us for more BioTalks. Thank you very much.